Welcome to How Hard Can It Be, the podcast where we explore AI one question at a time.
Hey, welcome back to How Hard Can It Be, the show where we explore AI one question at a time. Today's guest is Eduardo Ordax, a principal go-to-market lead for generative AI at Amazon Web Services in EMEA. He works with some of the world's most complex organizations to architect GenAI strategies that scale, ensuring productivity gains aren't trading off security or compliance. His insights on agentic AI and partial autonomy are especially timely for CISOs wrestling with enterprise deployment and risk posture. Hey, a big welcome, Eduardo. Great to have you on the show.
Thanks a lot, Alex. Super happy to be here with you, and looking forward to talk about this topic.
Awesome. So let's get right into it. You help Fortune-sized companies map and scale generative AI. What are some of the most common strategic missteps that you see in enterprise adoption, especially when it comes to, business ambitions versus safety and security, as well as compliance, for example?
Well, there are a lot, to be honest. I guess the main problem here is AI is super sexy these days, right? Like everyone wants to build the stuff working with AI. And even I was posting yesterday about it, right? Like many times we used to think, or these companies think like AI is the end goal, right? Like, hey, I want to build something with AI. And actually it's not. AI is just another tool that is super powerful because that's a reality. But, when you believe that everything turns around, AI, you commit many mistakes. We can, dive deep about many of these mistakes, but, it's usually, things around, skills, like people, like, do you have the right people in place? It's about how you have defined the process and so on. And one of the main components, because also is the topic for today, right? And that's why many companies that are struggling to, adopt AI at the scale is security. And especially, with these new technologies around, agents, MCPs, A2As, where security is one very important component. And the reality is they are not investing there or they don't know yet how to, face all the challenges. So many there. And we can talk about few of them today.
Well, let's double click on it. I think some of the AWS metrics show that companies take up to 9 months from prototype to production. Are there any organizational changes or structural changes you have seen organizations make, to accelerate and be more ready for AI? Data obviously is often one of the most complex or difficult topics in sense of readiness for AI. But are there also organizational structure changes that you see as a result of being more effective in adopting AI?
Yeah, you're right. It takes around 9 months, and you have this, false hope. Like most of the companies think like AI, or at least working with AI, it's super easy these days, right? I remember the old days with, when you had to build the pipelines, train the model, deploy the model, retrain if necessary. And the truth is today we have skipped all these steps, right? That's why many people think hey, I have the model there. I just can, start making API calls and everything. It's super easy. But actually it's not. And that's why it's taking many times it's taking even longer than 9 months. Mm-hmm. And even I was reading the other day, 50% of those projects, they are even, abandoned before going into production. So you said something that is super important. Of course, everything starts with data. And what I've seen over the last couple of years is those companies from, a very traditional sectors, I don't know, financial customers, insurance, healthcare, because they have invested such amount of time on data, having the data, ready, clean, with high quality, covered, and so on. For them, transition into this new world of generative AI was super easy. So that's the first learning here. Hey, if you invest time in data, is something that you are going to get a lot of benefits in the future. But you were talking as well about organizational changes, right? And I think right now AI, like it's being more and more a super important part of the business. So it's not something that lives only on the IT side, right? So I'm seeing many organizations who has appointed, heads of AI, or directors of AI, or center of excellence around AI. And sometimes these people, they don't belong to the IT department or or to the technology organization, but they are reporting to both. Like, hey, I may have like a dotted line to here and direct line to here, because the reality is like we don't need or we don't have to measure in terms of AI KPIs, but in terms of business KPIs. Like, hey, if I'm using, I don't know, generative AI, how much I'm increasing the productivity, or how much I have increase the customer experience or the NPS. So many things are transformational organizations changes, but also in terms of skills, right? Like if we think about the traditional role of the data scientist, this has changed a lot over the last couple of years. I mean, like, of course, you may be, keep training those models, but in terms of, new practices like RAG, agents, context engineering, prompt engineering, fine tuning, all these things, they are completely new. In some aspects, we have seen, data scientists that they are evolving into more like the AI engineering space, but also we see like many people, upskilling or, being hired because we need like new skills. And new skills many times, means like new folks joining companies. So yeah, many things are happening, and everything is happening super fast. So sometimes it's even complicated, to be updated with all these things.
Yeah, no, there's so many questions that I want to follow up on that. Let me start with, a lot of customers we work with, or let me say it like this: we did a piece on natural language is the new code, and the idea was that agentic AI to a large degree is democratization of software development, right? And to your point, it's not the IT department now that necessarily is the exclusive owner of an agentic workflow. So we see a lot of customers kind of struggling with the governance piece, or, almost thinking of handbooks they can give out to the business to guide them how they should basically instantiate and use their agentic, to use agentic workflows. And what fascinates me is, on the one hand, there is this massive pressure building up on generating ROI with AI based on the massive investments made. But on the other hand, to our earlier point, the data might not be ready, the organizational structure is not ready. Do you see this coming head to head at one point, where expected, maybe inflated expectations, lack of ROI, combined with lack of organizational readiness, will burst the bubble or kind of show us some decline in the enthusiasm of AI and agentic AI?
I have mixed feelings in this specific topic, right? I think from one side, especially if we talk about, venture capitals, all the startups that they are being created, I think there is kind of a bubble, but also because there is a huge or a fierce competition on the space, right? And it's not only about the enterprises; it's also about the countries, and we see like China and the US doing amazing things, like new companies building things from scratch. We all remember, the DeepSeek moment when everyone was talking about them, like, hey, these folks, they're like 30, 40 researchers, and they are competing face to face to OpenAI, right? So we could say that in some manner there is kind of a bubble, but it's just because everyone is pursuing the same thing. Like, hey, we want to achieve higher levels of intelligence, right? So if it's real when we heard like, hey, I'm funding a new company, I have not even delivered a product yet, and the valuation is over $2 billion. And we have seen this with companies like Safe Superintelligence or Thinking Machines, right? Well, maybe it can be a bubble. I mean, like, I'm not, an expert of investment, but yeah, it looks like maybe it could be like a bubble. From the other side, you're right. Like sometimes, AI is not meeting the expectations from the company. Like, hey, we are not achieving this ROI, or the productivity that we were supposed to gain actually is not the one that we are getting, right? I think this is more like part, not because of the potential, because I don't have any doubt about the potential of AI. If we take a look back, if we compare the systems we had 3 years ago, only 3 years ago, that it's almost, like a back to the corner, to the things that we have today. It's simply amazing. You were talking about coding, right? I was talking yesterday with some friends, and I remember when I was at the university, I'm a computer scientist, right? I learned to code in assembly, right? That it's super complicated. I mean, like you need to understand the hardware behind the scenes, right? Because it's different with every hardware that you are coding, right? I used to do this with Sun Microsystems, and it was quite hard. Then we had all these friendly programming languages like Java, C++, Python. The reality is like you didn't have or you didn't need to know assembly to code in Python. It's happening the same thing today. I mean, like we have evolved from commands code into friendly programming language, and right now it's just pure natural language.
Right.
So it's part of the evolution. We don't need to understand all these different, abstraction layers to code, for example, in natural language, as long as you understand what you are trying to deliver, right? It's not 100% because you still need to understand the basics, the foundations. But if I'm coming back to my point, all these things, they are like super new. And I think we are still trying to learn how to get value from there. That's why many companies, they are still not, like in that position to measure the ROI. But still we see like few amount of companies that they are already there. Probably those companies that they don't have all the legacy. They are like more like digital natives. I think these companies, for them, it's been much easier. So I think it's part of the learning curve. I usually say the technology sometimes, or what is happening today, it's going faster than the adoption, right? So we see like huge technology, and then like people is trying to learn how to adopt this technology. And there is a third component that sometimes we're not talking enough about it, right? And I think it's super important. So AI is pure non-deterministic, right? So sometimes we have assumed like, hey, if I'm doing ABC, the results should be D. And this is what it's in our mind, right? And this is not happening with AI. So how to handle systems that they're not going to answer every time the same when I'm giving the same inputs. That's the first aspect. And especially in like areas like, for example, Europe, where we have like a very specific regulation, sometimes it's hard because we need to, like be responsible with the regulation. And another important aspect is security, right? Like, hey, if I'm talking to an agent that I don't have full control over it, I mean, like if I'm thinking that my agent is going to be autonomous or semi-autonomous, I don't have 100% control on the things that this agent is going to do. Let's say you want to poison the agent to get, for example, confidential data. Okay, maybe if you are like a fast food delivery company, maybe it's not a big deal. But if you are like a financial institution, you are going to be in trouble. So I think those are some of the aspects that, makes all these companies sometimes, have some concerns, doubts about, hey, is this really a bubble or is not a bubble? In some aspects, we may see because there is a lot of hype around it. I also talk about this, like fake experts that it used to happen before with crypto. Like, hey, everyone wants to be there, wants to join the party, but we need to, we need to look beyond that, and that's the reality, and it's taking time. It's taking time. But if you ask me, and I want to highlight this because I think it's super important. Every time, I try to, or every year, I try to look back and compare with the previous year, right? And when I look to the things that the customers they are doing today versus the things they were doing like a year ago, of course, I'm seeing like huge evolution. So maybe we would like to be, like faster and faster, but the reality is like the things they are evolving.
Yeah, to your point, tech is changing very fast and organizations are kind of lagging a little bit behind, but we shouldn't underestimate how much change there actually is happening. A lot of customers we're working with, a lot of the complexity is because AI touches almost or probably every single function in an organization, or will touch, that these teams become quite cross-functional, and it's hard to coordinate, right? You have IT, you have security, you have legal, you have compliance, you have privacy. When you work with clients in EMEA on these projects, do you see more predominantly these cross-functional teams that are staffed across the organization, or is it more in, that at the inception of the project, it's still very IT focused, and other functions will step in later, for example?
I think still, because, like as I said before, it's taking time, right? We are still seeing like very, vertical organizations where, many things happens on IT, many other things happen on, business, many other things happens on marketing. That is still like super verticalized. If we are talking about traditional businesses, right? Like, hey, I don't know, any kind of, industry from the energy or, FSI or insurance or I don't know, retail, whatever. That is still very, a vertical organizations. When you ask me about, for example, ISVs, independent software vendors, or even startups, like big startups, or, digital natives companies, it's a different story. Because there you see this kind of, cross-functional teams where, you are building a project, and within this project, you will have people from, different domains, because actually you need that, right? You need to have that expertise. So I think the first kind of companies for more like traditional enterprises, they are trying to migrate into this new, model or business model. Let's call it, but still, it's taking some time, and also because one important aspect is skills, right? And sometimes we need to assume that not all the people they are going to have these skills to collaborate on this project, but I would say most of them, they're trying to evolve into this model that sometimes even doesn't need to be like, hey, I need to change the organization of my company from scratch. It's more like, hey, I need to build new bridges, right? Like they didn't or they were not there in the past, and we need to have it today, right? But yeah, and we have a good example on Amazon Pharmacy, right? On Amazon Pharmacy happened something like that. When we were trying to adopt AI, we had to build cross-functional teams where you're going to have people from legal, from HR, from IT, from business, because that's the only way, right? So I think kind of this mixed organizations, because still you need to have some kind of dependencies, usually works much better than traditional old models.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So you operate in EMEA. So in EMEA, and you mentioned it before, there's GDPR, there's the EU AI Act. There is state level regulations in the US, but there is nothing on federal level comparable to the GDPR or the EU AI Act. In your experience working with enterprises, is the fact that there is relatively stiff regulation in Europe, do you think it slows down adoption? You think it slows down innovation? Or would you say, no, the opposite? The only thing it does that companies actually think about safety, security, compliance from day one and not try to bolt it on later once they're in production?
I think both, right? And in terms of innovation, I think we have great examples in Europe of super innovative companies building around AI. We have examples like Mistral AI. We have examples like Hugging Face. We have examples like even DeepMind was born here. We have so many examples. Lovable is from Sweden, and they hit this record of $100 million annual recurrence revenue in the first 6 months or 7 months. So I don't think it's stopping innovation. Maybe it could accelerate more innovation, and that's true as well, right? In terms of investment, in terms of facilities, and so on. But if you ask me about enterprise, right? First of all, I must say, hey, I'm, in favor of the regulation. We are, handling a technology that sometimes, well, not sometimes, actually, we really don't know how it works. When, when we are trying to explain the results of, LLMs, we simply don't know why it's coming up with this kind of answer, right? So explainability right now is not there. It's kind of a black box, right? So we have a technology that we cannot explain. That's why regulation is super important. In the way that, with any other progress or, discovery in the past, AI requires to make sure we are going to use it for the good. Of course, in terms of enterprise, they will use it to be more productive, to increase the experience of the customers. But also, we know all these, like things around, like fake content, misunderstandings. You can, like replicate someone else's voice, image, video, whatever. So we need to be super careful. And I think that's why, like regulation, it's good. And what we have done here in Europe with different, like levels of risk, I think the approach is right. But of course, one thing is the approach and different thing is the execution, right? Sometimes, like the most talented people is on the private companies. They are the ones that they are building. And the people who is regulating, they are like quite behind, right? So we are saying people who has to regulate to understand the technology that is not in their scope. That's why I think that, like it's something that could be improved. Like, hey, let's put all these folks together. It's not like somebody coming to me and say like, hey, this is going to be the regulation, but, like sitting together and say how the regulation is going to be. So I know in terms of adoption, this regulation is slowing down a little bit. If I compare US adoption to the adoption in Europe, it's quite faster. Here, and this is, like a very common feedback from the customers, like, hey, I don't know if I should do this because I'm not sure if I'm going to be compliant, or hey, what's happening if a customer calls to me and say like, hey, all this content, how has been generated? So they still have many concerns. That's why they don't move into production. They are still building stuff, they are testing, they are piloting, but eventually for them it's quite complicated to move into production. That's why most of the use cases that we are seeing here, it's for internal purposes, where at least you have everything under control, right?
Yep.
I think the US is a different story. There is a very common quote here in I'm not sure if it's in Spain or it's in Europe, that we say like, hey, it's better to ask for forgiveness instead of asking for permission.
Yes.
We are not applying for AI here. We are like super cautious. And there in the US, it's a different story. I see companies doing like amazing stuff, testing things from the very beginning. And that's why they are learning faster, because they are not scared. They don't have the same concerns they may have here to move forward, right? There are still many other aspects, right? Because even when you come to Europe, there are like different velocities, right? It's not the same UK if you compare to France, or if you compare to Spain, Greece, or Italy. So there are like different speeds. But still, I think, like in many aspects, regulation is slowing down a little bit the adoption. And this is something that we need to figure out how to handle it in a much better shape.
Yeah. Although, to be fair, in highly regulated industries like finance in the US, you will also see exactly what you said, that all use cases are internal first, because, companies want to build confidence and the idea that they have control over the tech before they start exposing it to consumers. I'd like to jump back a little bit to something you mentioned before, which was MLOps, right? So before GenAI was unleashed onto all of us, MLOps was a relatively mature practice, lifecycle management, clear defined roles. But now, sometimes GenAI or Agentic AI is more application development than pure data science, to your point. Do you see companies trying to fit GenAI and Agentic AI into MLOps, if they had that before? Or did they say, MLOps is for deterministic models, we're doing something else here with GenAI?
You're right. That's a very good point. I remember a couple of years ago, because actually I was working as, like a business developer for MLOps, and I was working with many different companies around the globe, trying to help them to adopt, like MLOps practices. Because MLOps, it was like a very wide concept. It was not only about technology, but it was about, like how to define the process of, like training models, monitoring models, evaluating models, deploying models,
yes.
all different practices, right? And one of the main bottlenecks for customers was deploying models. They were struggling to deploy the models. Yeah, yes, that's this very simple, like a step on the process. It was a bottleneck for them. And magically, you have LLMs. With LLMs, most of the times you don't need to deploy the model, because, to be honest, most of the people, they consume it just via API, because they are not, they are like big models, and deploying these models is not like very cost effective, right? So it seems like, hey, MLOps is not needed anymore, right? Like, hey, we have these magic models and everything is solved. But, like after the time when you start, like including other practices like prompt engineering, that you need to version your prompts, or you implement RAG and you need to define the permissions, the different databases, who is going to be or who is going to get access, how to synchronize your database on real time, or like if you are building agents, how to trace or debug your agent, because they are doing like many different things. What is actually the problem of your agent, right? But you also need to monitor your agent on real time, so you need to establish like a monitoring, observability, and so on, right? So that's why when I'm not sure if like we should call it MLOps anymore, or it has a different name, but still
Agentic
it's ops.
Yeah.
Agentic ops, but regardless the name, it's the ops side. And right now, this is the biggest challenge for most of the companies, the ops part. And especially with agents. Agents is super easy to build an agent. Everyone can build an agent in just 3-4 minutes, right? But then when you are trying to deploy this agent, and when you are trying to deploy this agent, not only one single agent, but you are deploying hundreds or thousands of different agents. So deploying agents at a scale is like the operational overhead is huge. You need to identify the agent one per one to say like, hey, this agent is going to get access to this MCP server. So you need to see which is the unique identity of this agent, for how long this agent is going to run, how to isolate this agent, how to communicate to other agents. So the ops side is super important. And it is right now when the companies, they saw the need to come back to the, like a foundations and say like, hey, I need to define all these ops practices. That again, is around people, it's about how the process is going to work, but it's also about technology, right? Like, hey, if I'm building agents, yeah, land chain is great because, like, it's super easy and so on, but because, like, the abstraction level is so high, then it becomes, like, super complicated to debug an agent, right? So, yeah, maybe this is good for prototyping purposes, but I need to define a completely new approach from scratch. So they're starting having all these considerations, and now I see more and more companies working on the ops side, right? And it's happening as well with vibe coding, that it's becoming super popular. I think it's great because it has democratized the way, like, people can, like, build stuff. But at the same point, we are seeing many new roles raised around vibe coding, because you need to check the code, you need to validate it, you need to clean it. So it's part of time. I always say the same thing. In production, ops, it will be always required, regardless how we call it. More and more companies, they are starting working now in that space.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Human in the loop, kind of as we come towards the end, my second last question before I ask you what keeps you awake at night. We see, the memory function, human in the loop, becoming more and more important, right? So customers start to understand the value of building first versions where they basically use human in the loop to enrich memory, until it gets to a point where they can trust, for lack of a better word, that the agent can be released into the wild, for lack of a better word. Is this a common pattern you see, or an increasing pattern, that memory function learning and human in the loop is a critical part of not only development but ultimately deployment?
Absolutely. Especially, as I said before, like, we really don't understand how these agents are going to work, right? That's why it's super important to have this human in the loop, because at some point of time, we need a person to validate if what I'm seeing is true or is not true, or is what I'm deciding, right? And even when we handle like ISV solutions, where like GenAI is working embedded on these solutions, we see human in the loop all the time. Like, hey, this is what you were trying to expect, give me feedback, and so on. So with agents, I don't expect to have in the very short term like fully autonomous agents in the same manner that we can understand, for example, fully autonomous driving, right? That, by the way, we even don't have it here in Europe. It's not because the technology is ready, because more or less the technology, it could be ready, but it's also about the implications, right? So we see more and more human in the loop. I think the biggest challenge for human in the loop is to define where and when we will need a human to jump into the a process and review. But absolutely true, especially when we are handling applications or interactions with the end customer. So that's a super important point. And many companies, they are working in this space. I think, if I'm not wrong, very recently Anthropic, I think it was Anthropic, acquired a specific company just dedicated for a human in the loop. So this one important component, and memory is something that really cultivates me. But sometimes also complicated to use it or to handle, because for us it's supernatural, right? Like our brain works in that amazing manner where it perfectly knows where the knowledge needs to go. This is going to be like short-term memory. This is going to be like long-term memory. This is going and it's super clear for us, right? I think for AI agents, we are still not there. We define by rules how we want this or to keep this memory. Like, hey, if it's like in time conversation, okay, yeah, I need to remember the things that I'm talking to you, but also I need to remember your preference. So this is like a more long-term memory. But my preference, when I decide that this is my preference, how many times do I have to say something to say like, hey, I want this? Maybe I'm saying this just because I don't have any option, but it's not my preference. So in our brain works like perfectly clear. I think in these systems we are still learning how to handle, but memory is a super important component, because agents needs to have this kind of agency, and for having agency you need to have memory. You need to have a memory about all interactions, previous experience, and so on. How we handle this is going to define how successful or not successful the agent is going to behave. So to be honest, I love that field. I think we are going to see a lot of evolution there in the coming months. But yeah, it's critical, to be honest.
Perfect. So last question, Eduardo, what keeps you awake at night?
The easy question, my kids. That's the easy one. I mean, like, I have like 2 years and 4 years, right? No, but I mean, like, to be honest, right? Well, not to be honest, because my kids keep me away. But my unique concern is from one side. We finally come up with the approach to find a system that is much more, by far, much more intelligent than us, that it's going to explain us, I don't know, how to explore the world, how to explore the space, to explain us why we are here. Because the reality is we know the history, we know some part, but we really are not able to explain many things that are happening to us, right? So my concern is, if at some point of time we're in a good position to achieve this, that for sure we are not going to achieve it by following the same approaches that we are taking today, to make sure we are using it for the right purpose. So I'm a bit concerned, right? Also, I'm a bit concerned that we rely too much on AI, that we forget our roots. And I'm talking about this because, I see people, for example, using ChatGPT as a therapist, right? Like, hey, yeah, it could be fine, but because, there are so many things that maybe, I'm a bit, concerned about telling to others, and I feel more relaxed if I'm telling to ChatGPT. But I mean, we are people, and we have born to be with people. At the end of the day, we are animals, right? And we want to be together. So I'm a bit, or I have that fear that, especially for new generations, they forget their roots, especially because I have a couple of kids, and I know in the way they are going to grow up is completely different to the way that we grew up in the past. Like, we were playing outside, we didn't have video games, or, at least we're doing different stuff. So for sure, that's, a worry a bit to me. And if you're asking me about something that, it's more present, because the other couple of things is more in the futuristic side. You said before, right? I'm concerned we are not able, because of the hype, because of the noise, to leverage the technology that we have today. Because we are so busy on the hype on what is going to come in the future.
What's the next big thing?
We are correct. We are missing the opportunity because I think, to be honest, AI can improve a lot how we are managing business. I think we will be in a position to release services much faster, much better. We will learn more. It can help us in many different ways. So I think we need to make sure that we can leverage the value that we have today, regardless on what is going to come within the next few years.
Perfect. Eduardo, thank you so much for being on the show. Learned a lot today from you. So, would love to have you back in the future, and all the best.
Thank you, Alex. It was super good to be here with you today.
Much appreciated.
Today's podcast is brought to you by AIceberg. In just 5 minutes, AIceberg becomes a guardian agent that oversees all AI traffic, enforces policies, and protects your enterprise from AI breach. Learn more at aiceberg.ai.